There's a lot of revealing information in those two notes that I don't think. I think the sheriff would have did himself some good if he would have released this in day one.
If you hear from Nanos, he says, "Oh no, here, go ahead. We'll let it play, and then we'll talk."
My understanding that he did not want the FBI involved in the very beginning. He did not send the evidence where it should have been sent, which would be to Quantico, the best equipment available. When the FBI finally was brought in, we finally got the biggest break in that case.
Nobody's going to recognize this style of writing. Why do I say this? Because I don't believe that's the style of writing that the person normally uses.
Two separate channels, reacting independently to the same 6-month press release, land on the same complaint from two completely different angles. Information that could have mattered got out 6 months late, and even now that it's out, one profiler thinks it might not mean what the sheriff's office wants it to mean. Let's go through 6 specific claims across both reactions. I'm Marcus Wren, the creator of the Tell Index, a framework for analyzing statements and behavior in criminal cases. Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old mother of Today co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, disappeared from her Tucson, Arizona home in the early hours of February 1st, 2026. Today's video breaks down 2 independent reactions to the same event. Sheriff Chris Nanos's 6-month press release, which for the first time included the full text of both ransom notes and a detailed behavioral indicator bulletin. One reaction comes from Big City Crime. Inside the red tape, a panel of retired homicide detectives and FBI agents, joined by retired Undersheriff Bob Gilliam. The other comes from criminal profiler Pat Brown, working solo. Hit subscribe if you want to see more analysis like this. The Big City Crime panel starts by reading through the sheriff's new bulletin, which lists specific behavioral changes the public should watch for in the unidentified man from the doorbell footage.
Yep. But before we get to the notes, I think it's important to talk about what you just read, because this is the closest thing we've ever gotten to when the BAU puts out a profile on the offender. This has a lot of the information that you would find in the profile, including, they hint at the pre-incident indicators and point toward the post-incident behavior, and then go into the distinctive linguistic characteristics that you might find that could help identify this person. But when we look at the post-incident behavior, these are a lot of the things that Jim Fitzgerald has talked about and Jim Clemente have talked about over and over, about when you see when something like this happens, we all have our way of dealing with it, but an offender is going to behave in a way that's going to be very, very specific and very, very interesting to the trained eye. So they're trying to train your eye. We're at the 6-month point now, and they're giving us stuff that I agree with you, Tim, should have been given out sooner.
The panel's complaint has a real professional doctrine behind it, not just hindsight. Public information doctrine for major crimes generally treats an information vacuum as something the media and the public will fill on their own, with speculation, if investigators don't fill it with something first. Bob Gilliam, who says he trained under FBI PIO instructor Jim Vance at the Bureau's National Academy, describes the same principle directly in this episode. You always give the media a little something, or they're going to craft the narrative. That's not a fringe opinion. It matches a basic tenet used across public safety crisis communications. A sustained absence of official information tends to get filled by unofficial sources, whether or not those sources are accurate. Cross-checking this against the case's own timeline, the behavioral indicators released this week, changes in hair, sudden facial hair removal, unexplained hand injuries, missed work, sudden departures from the area, describe exactly the kind of thing a neighbor or co-worker could plausibly have noticed back in February or March when memories were freshest. 6 months of decay in exactly the kind of memory this bulletin depends on is a real measurable cost of the delay, independent of whatever internal reasons the sheriff's office had for waiting. The panel then turns to the first note's actual structure, the demand itself.
But you have what appears to be a cafeteria-style ransom demand here, where you're asking for $4 million and then $6 million, and that is just totally illogical to me.
Yeah.
The panel's read on that particular detail holds up against how kidnap for ransom negotiations actually tend to work. In the private security and K&R, kidnap and ransom insurance industry, initial demands are treated as opening positions almost by definition. Specialist negotiators expect and plan for a large gap between the first number named and the amount actually paid, with settlements in real cases frequently landing at a small fraction of the opening ask after weeks of back and forth. What real K&R negotiations essentially never do is build an automatic price increase into the very first written demand before any negotiation has even started. That removes the negotiating room professional kidnapping operations are specifically trying to preserve, and instead reads more like an ad hoc deadline threat than a structured demand written by someone who has done this before. The panel then plays a clip from a Fox News interview in which FBI Director Kash Patel disputes Sheriff Nanos' account of the FBI's early involvement.
Look, Sean, the FBI, the world's premier law enforcement agency, is here to help in every missing persons case. And just like most missing persons cases, they're state-led cases because the state has a jurisdiction. And in this case, like others, we offered our help from day one. And we'd gotten to some of that information and evidence earlier. You just outlaid what we did and what we can do. But the state has the right and the sheriff has the right to conduct his investigation, and he has the right to own it as well. They sent the DNA to a private laboratory, which took 6 weeks. We offered Quantico from Jump, the world's best laboratory. And of course, we worked with our private sector partners at Google brilliantly to show you that imagery and data from the Ring doorbell. But had we gotten there days earlier and access to it, we could have gotten more out of the cache data that was set to auto-delete because there was no subscription service to that product.
This is a dispute between two officials, both claiming primary credibility on the same case, and it's worth being precise about what's actually confirmed versus asserted. The jurisdictional point Patel is making has real legal grounding. Kidnapping cases can trigger federal jurisdiction under the Federal Kidnapping Act once a ransom demand crosses state lines or interstate communication is used, which gives the FBI standing to formally join a case regardless of whether local authorities request it, meaning offering help from day one and being allowed to actually work the case are two different things, and the gap between them is exactly what this dispute is about. The specific claim that DNA went to a private lab and took 6 weeks to process is a concrete, checkable assertion. If true, it's a meaningfully long delay compared to federal lab turnaround for priority cases, though this video cannot independently verify the 6-week figure beyond Patel's own account. The panel adds a separate unverified claim of their own on top of this, that roughly 200 FBI agents were stationed nearby in a hotel and not permitted to participate, which does not appear corroborated by any other source and should be treated as a claim still awaiting confirmation, not an established fact, even though it echoes the same broader jurisdictional dispute. Later in the same episode, retired FBI agent Moreno O'Connell pushes back on a theory from a different interview the panel had referenced days earlier. Jim Clemente's pronoun-based case that only one person wrote both ransom notes.
I know Jim Clemente. I listened to that, and I've heard Jim say this on a couple of other occasions. And Jim may very well be correct in his assertion, but this is one of the few times I disagree with him. I think that, and Jim has said that he believes it was one offender. So, and I don't think that that is probable in this case for a couple of reasons. The first reason, and probably the most compelling reason, is Porch Guy has a radio in his pocket, his jacket pocket, in my opinion. It's not a scanner. It's not a Wi-Fi jammer. It's not some other device. In my opinion, that is a two-way radio. It's one of the small ones you can buy at Walmart or
I agree.
Yeah, one of those places. And then the other reason is when Porch Guy is right after he stands up from picking the shrubs. He looks out toward the road, and he appears to be making some kind of visual contact with something or someone out there, and that would be looking. If you're standing at the door facing the road, he's looking off to the right. It would be his left as he's facing the shrubs there. And it appears as though he is motioning or doing something, but you can clearly see him looking in that direction. There's something there that caught his attention, and I believe that is the most likely answer to that question is an accomplice of some type, whether it's a driver or somebody else walking around the other side of the house or not. But the radio is the most compelling part of that, and I believe that there are at least 2 suspects in this case, if not 3. And I don't think I initially said maybe up to 5 early on in this case, but as we evolved here, I think it's at least 2, if not 3.
O'Connell is making a specifically different kind of argument than Clemente's, not a linguistic read of the notes, but a physical evidence read of the video, and both details he cites have a real, checkable basis. Consumer two-way radios sold at general retailers typically operate on FRS, Family Radio Service frequencies, require no license, cost as little as $20 to $30 a pair, and are functionally indistinguishable on camera from a Wi-Fi jammer or scanner at a glance, meaning O'Connell's read requires no exotic equipment to be plausible. His second point, reading a suspect's gaze direction as evidence of coordination with someone off scene, is a standard element of behavioral crime scene analysis. Investigators are trained to note where a subject's visual attention goes at a given moment, on the theory that unscripted eye movement often reflects genuine environmental awareness rather than performance for the camera. Clemente and O'Connell aren't contradicting each other's raw observations. One is reading the letters, the other is reading the video. But they reach opposite head counts from the same case, and neither is working from anything beyond what's been made public. Turning to Pat Brown's video, she opens by directly rebutting online claims that Nancy's own family staged the disappearance for financial reasons.
First of all, I don't think that that they're suffering terribly from economic issues. But even if they were, Nancy Guthrie was kidnapped. Her body has never been found, which means that it would take at least 5 years, just 7 years, I don't know quite with Arizona, to declare her dead in order to then do something about her estate.
Brown's instinct here is legally accurate, and the actual statute makes her point even sharper than she states it. Under Arizona revised statutes, Section 14-1107, a missing person whose death isn't otherwise established is presumed dead only after 5 continuous years of unexplained absence, meaning a family motivated purely by inheritance would be choosing a plan that pays out, at the earliest, in 2031, while carrying the enormous risk of a homicide investigation in the meantime. There's one narrower path Brown doesn't mention that's worth noting for completeness. Under a separate statute, ARS, Section 36-325, if a murder conviction is ever obtained in Nancy's case even without a recovered body, that conviction itself legally establishes death immediately, bypassing the 5-year wait entirely. But that path requires someone to be convicted of killing her, which is a strange and self-defeating route for a family supposedly engineering a payout. Either way, Brown's underlying argument holds. A 5-year minimum wait with no guarantee of ever collecting is a poor motive for staging a kidnapping. Brown closes with a theory about why the note's phrasing feels inconsistent and why she doubts publishing the exact wording will do much good.
It was finally the best thing they did because he was prior to times where you could change up anything. And his brother read that and said, no, that's my brother. It was great. And I think they should have done the same thing with the DC snipers because I would have recognized the Jamaican writing. But in this case, with this day and age, and this person's already very adept with using computers. I don't think it's going to do a crap load of good, personally.
Brown's comparison case is real and precisely documented, which makes her underlying point sharper rather than weaker. FBI forensic linguist James Fitzgerald pushed the Bureau and the Attorney General to publish the Unabomber's 35,000-word manifesto in 1995, specifically so someone might recognize the writing style, and it worked. David Kaczynski, Ted Kaczynski's brother, recognized the phrasing and structure and reported his suspicion, leading directly to the 1996 arrest. That case is the strongest possible argument for publishing a suspect's own words. Brown's point is that the Unabomber's manifesto was unmistakably his own unfiltered voice, with nothing to compare it against but itself, while a short ransom note, run through translation or AI rewriting software, has a specific modern way to defeat exactly the recognition effect that worked in 1996. Whether that actually happened here is unconfirmed and may never be provable either way. But the mechanism Brown describes, deliberately obscuring one's natural phrasing before sending a threatening document, is a realistic, low-effort step available to essentially anyone today in a way it simply wasn't 3 decades ago. A bulletin that could have jogged someone's memory 5 months sooner than it did. A ransom demand that broke the basic rules of how real kidnappers negotiate. A jurisdictional fight where one very specific claim, 200 agents sidelined in a hotel, still has no independent confirmation. A two-way radio spotted where a pronoun slip was supposed to prove one man acted alone. A staged kidnapping theory that Arizona's own laws quietly rule out. And a note recognition strategy that worked in 1996, but runs into a very different world in 2026. Which of these 6 points surprised you most? Comment below. I read everyone. Subscribe for more analysis like this.